about physiological issues that can get in the way of eye tracking, describe a simple test for pre-screening, and introduce the eye gaze edge. Now, there is a lot of information in these slides and a lot of information to take in. So for those of you who are new to eye gaze and don't know too much, don't become overwhelmed. For those of you who are seasoned clinicians and are working with populations who require AAC devices, this may be right up your alley. The first thing I'd like to acknowledge is eye tracking and eye gaze AAC can be a little bit, initially, a little bit overwhelming, a little bit mysterious. Some therapists, if you have had the chance to sit down and try for yourself an eye gaze communication device, you sit in front of it, you calibrate, and all of a sudden it's selecting whatever you're looking at. It's a little bit overwhelming in that it's amazing. It almost seems magical. For those of us with typical eyes who may be young and healthy, eye tracking can work just fine. For those patient populations who have medically compromised bodies, there are certain things we need to know, certain questions we need to ask, and a foundational understanding of how eye tracking works to problem solve when it becomes challenging. And it certainly does for our patients who need this. So I want to lay that foundation and talk about some of those questions we need to be aware of and questions we need to be asking. We started in 1988. We've had various generations of our camera. We'll talk a little bit about that. Before we get into this definition of what is eye tracking, I would like to share as a clinician things that I have heard over the years about eye tracking AAC. For those of you who have used systems with patients, you may be familiar with larger companies, more established companies. This may be totally new to you. I'll tell a few quick stories before going in. So as an eye gaze representative, I get called into people's homes and to trial out the eye gaze edge with patients who are trying out different devices that are available to them. Sometimes I'll walk into someone's home and they may have an old device that they've been using or they've been borrowing from their local motor neuron association. It's common for me to hear, I hate this device when I walk in and they're trying to work with whatever they've been given. Well, why do they hate it? They hate it because it's difficult, it doesn't work. And most of all, they had this great hope that it would deliver communication, it would deliver connection. What people really want is connection to the world around them and connection to their loved ones. When they can't get that, there's frustration. Or I might walk into another family who received a used device from another company and they say, well, eye gaze does not work for my spouse. And their loved one has lived years and years with motor neuron disease, and the system they had didn't work, so they were under the impression that eye gaze did not work for them. But when they got delivered a device that works well, that has software accommodations, it works just fine. And they have that communication restored to their loved ones. Or they might say, well, we purchased a low-cost eye tracking device online, but it doesn't work, and we're so frustrated. Or I can calibrate, but I can't use a keyboard, or I can't log on to Facebook and communicate with my family members. So these are common things we can hear when eye tracking technology is not appropriately and successfully applied to a situation. Those scenarios, with the tools the eye gaze edge has, can often be avoided and troubleshooted appropriately so they can get the access they're needing. All right, so that said, what is eye tracking? Eye tracking is a way for us to determine where somebody is looking on the screen. A camera at the bottom takes pictures of one eye or both eyes and digitizes those images and analyzes it to predict where the person is looking. This gaze data that the camera and software is taking can be used passively or it can be used immediately as an access point. Here's a picture of what eye tracking looks like. So you have the speech generating device screen, you have the eye tracker at the bottom. The eye tracker is shining infrared light up to the person's eye and traveling back down to the camera as it's taking pictures. And the person is looking at the screen. And what we have here is an invisible triangle from the camera to their eye, the eye to the screen, and the screen to the eye tracker. This triangle is what the image processing software uses to predict where that eye is looking. It's math. Those angles in the triangle, this invisible triangle, help the math do its work and create that magic. When somebody sits down, they start selecting things. All eye gaze systems on the market require some sort of user calibration in order to be able to determine where someone's looking. Our system uses something called the pupil center corneal reflection principle. That's a big term, so let's break it down. All right, so when somebody sits down in front of the eye gaze edge, there is always an eye image on the screen, their eye image. So what we have here is a typical healthy eye image. The pupil center, we want to see in the pupil center, there's a dot. And then, so in the center of that pupil, which is lit up, there's a small white dot. And then the corneal reflection is that small dot of light on the perimeter of the pupil around 5 o'clock. These 2 points of light are what the camera must see and track. As that eye moves around, those 2 points of light move around in relationship to each other. So this tool, having the camera's image right on the screen of the eye gaze edge, helps us immediately start taking out the guesswork of when it doesn't work and understanding what the camera is seeing so it can be successful. So here we see someone looking up and to the left, now up and to the right. So as this person's eye has moved around, these points of light have changed in relationship to each other. We see the pupil is clearly visible by the eye tracker, and there's no problem here. When we go into someone's home who has up until now been unsuccessful with eye gaze, when we put the eye gaze edge and this image in front of them, we use that as a tool to troubleshoot and get eye tracking working for them. So that really is the answer to the most frequently asked question, which is this. Well, what makes the eye gaze edge different from another device that I know, maybe a Tobii Dynavox device or a SmartBox device? One thing is this on-screen eye image that helps us troubleshoot the foundational principles of eye tracking to get it working when it's not. We'll go over some more questions later. Here's an example of a calibration screen. After calibration, it gives us mathematical numbers to know how accurate will that person be, and on what parts of the screen are they accurate and less accurate. That's very valuable information as we're evaluating as clinicians. Calibration is the process of mapping the curvature, the radius of curvature of that person's eyeball, and also finding the center of the macula in the retina, in the back of the eye. So calibration is very important, and it really requires this person to have a smooth and clean corneal surface of their eye. All of our eyes are uniquely shaped, so my calibration won't necessarily work well for anybody else. If we're recommending systems, it behooves us as clinicians to sit down and try out the different systems that are available. So each of you, I know that it's under pandemic circumstances right now, so we may not be meeting face to face, but when you get the chance to sit down and try the eye gaze edge, notice how easy calibration is and how accurate you're able to get into a communication screen. It should be easy to calibrate and accurate. We really should be trying all the systems that we're setting in front of our clients. There are factors that can make or break success, some of which we'll talk about here. So first of all, the person's eye physiology, their ability to move it up and down, left and right. We know that positioning and having the right mount is critical. Being aware of the environmental light in their surroundings is very important. As therapists, we need to understand how their body will change and how their eyes will change as their disease progresses. And then also we need to have critical thinking skills during the evaluation as we're using different devices with our client. We also need to be aware of the latest camera technology that companies are coming out with. So we'll talk about some of that today with our Encore camera. Now, for eye gaze access, we need to be aware that fatigue can be a very big problem. They're positioning, the light around them, and then the system light that's coming out of the system. So running an eye gaze system in and of itself does not cause eye muscle fatigue. The muscle movement of moving our eyes this way and that way is happening day and night. And that in and of itself is not fatiguing. However, we know that sitting in front of a computer system, focusing with our cognitive energy, positioning ourselves, all of those things do cause fatigue. So we need to rule some of those out when we're setting up a system in front of someone. Like we said here, much like the muscle of the heart, which is beating day in, day out, night and day, our heart does not fatigue. Same thing with our eye muscle movements that are moving this way and that way. You need to be aware of, as therapists, that some people have light sensitivity, and the amount of light coming out of other eye tracking systems on the market is too much for them. One unique thing about the Eye Gaze Edge is we have one infrared light coming out of our camera, just one. So it produces less heat on the eye and dries out the eye much less than other systems on the market. Our screens are all in muted colors. We have dark screens, non-glare screen cover, and this is designed for people who have light sensitivity and who are already fighting fatigue because of the diagnosis they've been given. So you need to know that some people will be very sensitive to other eye tracking AAC devices on the market, and they may do much better on a low fatigue system like the Eye Gaze Edge. That's one of the critical differences I would like you to take away from the session tonight. People have told us over 3 generations, turn down the light that is coming out of that system. So to limit fatigue, we turn down the light on the screen. We don't have bright or white screens, non-glare screen cover, and we just have them pay attention to the sources of light in the room. I'm going to show you 2 examples. So here is first a dark screen example of the Eye Gaze Edge keyboard. This next screen mirrors a keyboard that I saw at the ATIA conference 2 years ago of another company that was out there with an eye tracking system. It looked like this. So we have a bright screen and we have a dark screen. As we go back and forth between these 2 screens, you'll notice a big difference. Staring at this bright screen for 5 hours a day would be much more fatiguing than our low fatigue designed screen here in the iWorld program we have. So please be aware that fatigue for eye gaze communicators is a big deal, and having a system with that designed with that in mind is very, very important for long-term success. In 1998, there was research that came out about blue light waves and sleep. These principles led to all of us in our phones and tablets now. We have nighttime mode that's turned on to filter out the blue light waves in the evening because it impacts our sleep patterns. With that in mind, we filter out the blue light waves coming from the Eye Gaze Edge because we had the same complaint that people were having a hard time getting to sleep after using their device at night. Again, we have to shift the model from, what do we think is important? What do we like, to put ourselves in the shoes of people who have a disability, people whose bodies are failing, who are changing. This is something that's very, very important. We know that keeping the screen low in a neutral position will help them with their fatigue. If we position the screen too high, they have to crane their neck muscles, they have to lift their eyelid muscles, and that's very fatiguing. So keeping the screen low is something that we have learned, and the Eye Gaze Edge does very well with. Now, the Eye Gaze Edge, it's unique in that it's a modular system. So this camera moves independently of the screen. This is a benefit to people who have unique positioning needs. And we see this quite a bit. People who their neck and their spine are less than perfect, or they have to be positioned on their stomach. You get them comfortable, you put the screen visible to where they can see it, and then you point the camera to one eye that's available. That's all you need with the eye gaze edge. Here's an example of a child who must be sidelined because of their disease. Laying down comfortably, medically appropriate, put the screen where it's visible, point the camera at the available eye, which here is the child's upper eye.
Do you mind? Because I've just said, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
All right, here's a great article I'm going to recommend to each of you. So pull out your cell phones and take a photo of this screen or write down the title. This is from the ASHA Perspectives magazine in the summer of 2018. ASHA is the licensing body for speech and language pathologists here in the States. The article is called Eye Gaze 101, What Speech and Language Pathologists Should Know About Selecting Eye Gaze, Augmentative, and Alternative Communication Systems. This article is full of gems of wisdom that talk about what are the challenges of eye gaze systems, what are the eye conditions that can get in the way, and what is best practice as far as trialing and evaluating different devices. This article is the basis for best practice in the United States, that patients try 3 eye gaze devices before the clinician selects one. There are many differences between software programs, eye trackers on the market, and then also features that are written into each device. So I would highly recommend this article. They say that when evaluating eye gaze, SLPs should consider body and structure factors that will impact the client's performance. That includes vision, their physical status, their language ability, their cognition. And it gives examples of 6 eye conditions that can stop eye tracking from happening. It includes people with cataracts, people with ptosis, nystagmus, alternating strabismus, cortical visual impairment, and mydriasis. The nice thing is the eye gaze edge is the only system on the market that has software accommodations for each of these 6 eye conditions. So now that the eye gaze edge is available in Australia through the Brainery, this is really, really critical. We're finding that many people, say with motor neuron disease, develop ptosis of the eyelids. Their eyelids start to droop over time. Or people with mydriasis, so pupils or eye movement disorders. These are very important things to take into consideration. All right, so let me take a quick break there, and we're going to transition to some other slides here. The next few slides have eye images from the eye gaze edge, and we're going to breeze through them pretty quickly. I want to show these to you just to show you the power of this system as an evaluation tool. Like I said, many people who come to us needing eye gaze access are to the point where their bodies have gone through significant changes. And that includes their eye function, the mobility, the structure of their eyes. And that includes the unique thing about the eye gaze edge comes right now with one of 2 cameras, our prime camera or our Encore camera. And both of those cameras are medical grade, low fatigue, high accuracy instruments that have software accommodations for these 6 eye conditions. That said, let's look at some eye images. Right off the bat, when we set this up in front of someone, this eye image is rich with information that helps us navigate this pathway that can often be very difficult for these patients. All right, so here we have an image of a dry eye. Now, how we know that's a dry eye is we look at this image, and those 2 points of light that I pointed out before, those are gone. That's because this eyeball is so dry. Many people who need eye gaze access will have dry eyes, so it will be important for them to discuss with their doctor the ability for them to use eye drops as part of their daily routine. Okay. I'm going to skip some of this text for now. Let's just focus on the image so we can keep going. When somebody has dry eyes, accuracy degrades and they will not be able to accurately use a system. So if we have a system that lets them know they have dry eyes, it's a step in the right direction to getting a solution. Here we have someone whose eye image is streaked and goopy. So when we set this up, we know, again, we need to clear that out of the way before they can be a successful eye gaze user. Okay, moving on. Here's a picture of someone with cataracts. We can see the cataract in these images. They're dark spots that are appearing in the pupil. In the upper image, they're very small, concentrated. In the lower image, it's kind of larger and irregular shaped. If we know that's in place, we can work around it, or they may have to have it altered or surgically removed. And our camera will accommodate after that surgery to work with those eyes. The problem is when cataracts are removed, an artificial lens is placed in and it causes extra problems, but our software will take care of it for these patients. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about mydriasis. Here we have this boy who has an abnormally large pupil here on the left side, and the eye gaze edge will accommodate for abnormally large and abnormally small pupils. Now, why this is important is baclofen, which is a muscle relaxer, can have a side effect of mydriasis on their pupils. People with brain injuries or motor neuron disease, ALS or CP, sometimes are on baclofen. So this can be an impact that we need to know about. Here we have a picture of a droopy eyelid. So eyelid ptosis, this eyelid is starting to droop. Long term, our software compensates for that beautifully. So they can use their device not only when they start with their device, but 2 years down the road when their eyelids have drooped significantly. We have software accommodations for nystagmus and strabismus. Let's shift gear to talk a little bit about pre-screening. So how do we know who is appropriate for eye gaze? So first of all, we'll want to know their diagnosis. The frequent diagnosis we work with are motor neuron disease, people with cerebral palsy, brainstem stroke or other brain injuries, muscular dystrophy, spinal cord injury. So these people have eye movement and their cognition is there, but their body is frozen and immobile. The person who we're pre-screening for eye gaze needs to be able to move their eyes up, down, left, and right when asked to do so. Now, we have accommodations for people who may have limited, say they only have horizontal eye movement. We can work with that, but they need to be cognitively there to follow some basic directions. They also need to be able to communicate to us somehow, yes and no, whether that be by looking up for yes, down for no. Some people give us a thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. So they're able to respond to our questions cognitive linguistically. Let's shift gears to talk specifically about the eye gaze edge. Well, what can it do? It's a dedicated speech generating device that provides communication, access to a computer and internet, access to the functions of a smartphone, as well as environmental control. It's a device that is a touch screen. It can be used with a hand mouse or rollerball mouse, a switch, eye gaze, a head mouse. So it's very adaptable to their needs as they're coming into using the eye gaze edge device. It also comes with a keyboard and track mouse, which I've seen some patients use in addition to eye gaze. We have software pages for children, for adults, for people who need picture icon boards. There's many, many adaptable pages in the eye gaze edge based on their language level. We have 2 software programs. One is our original eye gaze program, which you see on the screen here. They're using that to access a MacBook. We also have our iWorld program, which is a central hub for all the most popular functions that people want today. So that includes surfing the internet, having medical communication, email, emergency call bell, music, virtual travel pages, phone calls, etc. Access to streaming services like Netflix and environmental control and smart home devices. So you'll notice here, this is a Facebook page. You'll notice it's turned into nighttime mode. Many of our adult eye gaze communicators, aside from communication on a keyboard, what do they want? They want text messaging and they want access to Facebook and Amazon. Through the eye gaze edge, you can access Facebook easily and fully. I've seen other devices really struggle with Facebook access. So that's important to a lot of adult communicators these days, Facebook. And again, they're using it on a device that is not causing them to fatigue quickly, and it has software accommodations that work with their unique eyes. We have full computer access. It's a Windows 10 platform with strong computer specs, access to phone and SMS text messaging, as well as high-level computer use. Here in this picture, again, we have the iGaze Edge controlling an outside computer. Here's a Mac desktop, could be a PC or a Linux system. We have people doing some amazing things with their iGaze Edge device. Let's talk a little bit about the Encore camera. This is our camera that is proprietary to the iGaze Edge. In the States, and I think this is the same in Australia, you really have 3 companies that are supplying eye trackers. One is Tobii, one is iTech Digital, and one is iGaze Inc., us. So if we can trial out the 3 cameras with patients, that is ideal, because the eye trackers are very different from each other, may or may not work well for your patient. The cool thing about the Encore camera, like I said, it is low fatigue, high accuracy, medical grade eye tracking device. Got a nice ability for the person to move around freely. This is our latest version, so it's more durable. Fewer calibrations are needed throughout the day, and that on-screen eye image is always there for us and for them to troubleshoot. It can track 1 or 2 eyes effortlessly if the person is moving around, and we have software accommodations for those 6 eye conditions we talked about earlier. All right, so let's wrap up with some questions that need to be asked during the iGaze AAC assessment. First and foremost, they need to be asking which device was the most accurate for me. So beyond calibration, could I access a communication keyboard? Could I access my phone screen? Could I access the call bell? If Facebook is important to me, could I access Facebook? They should be trying all of these things with the help of our representatives there. Is the device I'm choosing comfortable to use throughout the day for long periods of time? Does it have the features that I specifically find important or that I need? Will it work with my eyes as they change over time? Many devices out there, they might work well initially, but as the person's body changes over a year's time period, their eye tracker will stop working for them. I've seen that time and time again. Often it's because their eyes are changing and their eyelids start to droop. When somebody gets an iGaze communication device, they must get it from a company that can support them with the technical prowess to understand how to change settings. They need to be reachable. They need to have good people that they can reach on a weekend, they can reach on a holiday morning. And we really pride ourselves in that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and holiday morning. Sam, why don't we'll take it from there. I know we had some questions or any other thing you'd like us to discuss before we move into the FAQs or the questions that were asked. Sam, why don't we
Thanks, James. Yes, first thing, quickly need to address, we did have some technical issues. So anyone who joined the stream halfway through or missed anything at the start, we've recorded our session and we'll be uploading that later today and then sending that out to everyone. So make sure that you don't miss anything that we talked about earlier in the session. Now that that's out of the way, I think I'd like to, I guess, just go a bit back and forth with you, James, with some of the questions and some of the topics that people submitted when they registered for the session. And I think you've probably covered some of those aspects, but I think we can probably explore them a tiny bit more. We've got about 20 minutes to get through 10 questions, so I think we can talk a bit more about those as we go through them. So I'll jump on my share screen and bring that up.
I have them here too.
Perfect. So I think, I'm not sure if I think you talked about some of the populations that are really suited for iGaze technology. just to summarize that, we were talking about anyone with motor neuron disease, ALS, cerebral palsy, brain injury. Are there any other sort of diagnoses or disabilities that eye gaze is really relevant for from your experience?
Yes, so people who may not be completely paralyzed but need strong computer access for work, say someone with a spinal cord injury, so they may still be speaking, but they have the full, ability to have a career, but they need a really accurate and easy way to access the computer. I will say too that brain injury can be a little bit tricky, because we know that if someone has had a stroke, there are many different types of stroke, and someone may be able to say, if they have an iPad and they can touch an iPad, but it's very, very slow. Their family or their speech therapist might say, this is adding to their frustration, and maybe another access method would be better for their quality of life. So it just depends on what the brain injury is, and ask, how are they communicating right now, and how is that working for them and for their loved ones? I think those are really the most important questions to help drive that decision. But those are the main diagnoses. You're right. I will put in a plug again. About 85% of the people who get the eye gaze edge have motor neuron disease. And that is because this device has been tailored through specific feedback since 1988 from that population. So it's quick, it is easy, and it is non-tiring, which is three things that many eye gaze users really, really need to have a good long-term experience. So just keeping that in mind, again, someone might be wowed by a device that, I like the way it looks, but if it doesn't work well, and I've run into this, they say, well, we got this device, but it stopped working 6 months because, my eyes are changing or whatever, it's too tired, or I just hate it. That's what I've heard, I hate it. So again, really us guiding them, and what's the most important thing is finding a device that will be accurate and will work for them through the course of their disease, I found is the most important feature to be looking for.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I guess the other aspect around different diagnoses is depending, if we're looking at that sort of spinal example where someone is still able to communicate using their voice, it may be that we're looking at a mixed methods approach with different technologies, and an eye tracker is one of those ways to give them, I guess, alternative options to really get the outcomes they want.
Absolutely.
And I think you touched on that with the different ways that we can actually use. I've got my tablet hanging over my shoulder here. Use our system in that way.
Yes.
So we'll move on to question number 2. And I think we have broadly given a few brushstrokes around the key requirements for someone to use an eye gaze device. And I think, whilst we've got some really good flexibility around our camera with different eye conditions, eye health is something that we do need to be very cognizant of when we're doing assessments for an eye tracking camera. Is there anything that you think is worthwhile adding around that for some of the key things or requirements we need for someone to calibrate and successfully use an eye gaze device?
Yes, one thing I did not mention is the person needs to have visual acuity enough to see what's on the screen. And then also enough, I'll give a quick example. I was called in to meet with a man who had a traumatic brain injury, and he was in the process where his brain and his body were going through significant healing and changes over time. And the therapist called me in because they weren't quite sure of his cognitive linguistic level. They weren't sure of his vision. They had a lot of questions. And it was nearby, so I came in to help them assess. With the traumatic brain injury population, we know visually we need to probably make the screens very simple and not visually overwhelming. Put this in front, look at the condition of his eye, ask him some simple questions and see if he could make 2 simple choices, see if he could distinguish those colors I had. And we found out a lot of information, not only about his visual acuity, but his his receptive language to follow along with what we were asking him to do. So it really is a great evaluation tool. We just have to be aware of people with brain injuries may have very mixed results in different planes, visual or cognitive linguistic. That's part of the fun of it though, right? You know, really using the tools at our disposal to help understand how this person can best communicate.
Definitely. And I think there's definitely cases where, and I think we've talked about this a few times, where we visit a client and where, you know, we're confident, or we're, you know, it may be that this is maybe a Hail Mary, and we're thinking, look, we're going to assess this, don't think it's going to work, but we're going to give it a go. And they're in and they are navigating the system, flying along. So yeah, there's a bit of uncertainty, I think, with some diagnoses, because it's really difficult to assess, not just using an eye gaze as a communication tool, but that, you know, that cognitive level, that language level, depending on their disability. So I think keeping an open mind is always good on that.
That's right.
I think we can probably skip over question 3, because I think you talked about those pre-screening questions at the end of your presentation there. Unless there's anything you think we should add around some of those pre-screening questions?
No, again, asking how are they currently communicating, asking about their eyes, have they had any eye surgeries? Really, really important just for us to know. I will say, tagging on to the last question, the calibration process here is unique. And the reason I was thinking about this was because you were saying something, you know, what you were just saying, I was thinking of a client where this was so important. So he had struggled to calibrate with another device that is well known here. The calibration here, like I said, when the human eye naturally follows a moving target. So our calibration procedure starts off as a moving target. And even babies who don't have any receptive language to, you know, adult language yet, if they see a moving target, we can calibrate a baby just fine. They don't know what they're doing, but the human eye has this reflex. So if we can start them off, so a person with a brain injury, we don't know what's going on inside, we get them calibrated. From that calibration screen, we see what portions of the screen their eyes are moving to, how accurate they can be, how many buttons we can place on there. So it's a lot of information for this brain injured population to get them in. And I've seen it many times. We don't know what's going to happen. We get them calibrated, we get them on simple screens, and then they have this window where they are interacting with us, where nothing has been happening. So that the calibration procedure on the eye gaze edge specifically is data rich. It's automatic in that it does the mathematical work for us, and then it kind of gives us a snapshot of what we can expect. A lot of that data is what the other devices currently on the market are lacking as far as robust, very specific eye tracking access on a screen that you put in front of someone who may be, you know, an atypical, you know that they're people with motor neuron disease. Often we know receptively they're 100%, they're just waiting for access. With other populations, it can be a lot more complicated. So that information here is so helpful.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think this next question is probably, I think, relevant to what we're doing here today in general, and in that, where can someone get started with eye gaze technology? I think this sort of webinar session, learning a bit more about exactly what's going on with the technology side of things, I'd put this to you and say that it comes back to your practice as a therapist, whether you're an occupational or speech and language or another therapist, a clinician involved in supporting someone with their AAC, is to assess their communication needs. And then I think at the end of the day, with any technology, you've got to give it a go, and you've got to give it a try to learn yourself. And I found, from my own perspective as a learner with eye gaze edge, was I needed to spend time learning how to use it myself. And in that way, I think you develop not just an understanding of the system and the nuances of the technology and how it works, but also you develop a bit of empathy around what your client, our end user, is going to experience when they're using the system as well. And I think that's really important.
Yep.
And I'd say around resources to get started, I'd say there's some wonderful resources from iGaze Inc. around some excellent YouTube clips that give a really good overview of eye tracking and how it works with a bit more information as well. And I'll make sure we send out some of that material after the session. Now, a bit more of a very specific question here. We're talking about powered wheelchairs here. James, what are your thoughts around mounting and wheelchair control and what we can do with powered wheelchairs at the moment?
We work with several mounting companies, and the mounting companies across the globe can work universally with every device company. So first of all, whatever power wheelchair they have, yes, they can find the appropriate mount, and the iGaze Edge can just pop right in front of them. Like I showed you, our device is very small and light. I just popped it out. This would pop right into the wheelchair mount in front of them, and they would go. Now, driving the wheelchair is a different topic. Some manufacturers out there have the ability to interface with software that will allow the iGaze communicator who's sitting in a wheelchair to drive their wheelchair using their eye tracking device. The iGaze Edge currently does not have that ability due to liability concerns that we have. As a clinician, of course, if I have a patient who says driving my wheelchair is extremely important to me, it's important that we listen to that. So the devices that have that capability, we need to find out, again, going back to our first thing, can they calibrate? Can they use it accurately for communication, for Amazon, for texting, for face, everything they need. That is the gold standard, that they need to find the most accurate device. And I've had patients who have gotten another device based on, they wanted to drive their wheelchair, but that device did not work well for them. And they were stuck with a device that didn't work for any of that stuff. So again, making sure that we help our clients prioritize accuracy first, other cool features like wheelchair driving, really cool. I would love that. But we currently do not have that functionality on the iGaze Edge. It's neat to see, though, the advancements in technology, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And I think touching back on the mounting options for powered wheelchairs, I think the main thing is looking at what's currently on the wheelchair for the user and working out, okay, how can we mount our system to be in a position that's useful for them and they can actually navigate the system and use it really well, but it also isn't intrusive. So that, because I think what can happen with some users is they'll have a chair that has quite a lot of attachments that are almost encircling them, which I think that can happen in other settings, say in a hospital bed. So I think we have a lot of options around mounting, and essentially we just find the right mount for the right situation and we're good to go. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now, I had a very specific question around dwell settings. Someone was having some trouble with dwell settings, and I guess, how do we get the best out of our dwell settings and how do we use that to our advantage? And I guess framing that around, say, a beginner user to an advanced user, and how we change those settings to best suit them.
I like to stress three things on this topic. First is, when we set someone in front of an iGaze device, we need to teach them the rhythm of how to type. So if I have them on a simple keyboard that's 1, 2, 3, 4, I get them in and I teach them the rhythm. I can snap my fingers, I can pat their shoulder, so they can start feeling and understanding the timing. I have to look at this button for half a second, then this button for half a second. So get them to feel the rhythm and follow along so they can internally feel that. So there's one, the timing. 2, the dwell settings. So we can adjust the gaze duration, or how long someone has to gaze at a button. Does it need to be longer, shorter? Typically, we start people around 0.5 seconds or 0.6 seconds, which is kind of quick. But we found that this mirrors, we have to understand the design of the human eye is our eyes move rapidly, about 3 times per second, to collect information. So if we require someone to look at a button for 1 second, it's fighting their natural physiological instinct to move, to move, to move. So we just need to be aware and see how are they doing. Maybe we need to slow it down a bit. If we see them getting frustrated, or speed it up, teach them the rhythm. The third thing is the visual that we provide on the key. If they're looking at the letter A, do we have it bright and flashing, or do we have just a minimal, like a little dot? The more visual information on the screen in a key when they're dwelling on it, the more fatigued they can become. So eye gaze users have told us that the less visual information, the better. Now, if I have someone with a traumatic brain injury who needs visual attention to be drawn there, I can turn that on. But otherwise, I just have a small indicator of where they're looking, because that's based on user feedback. Those are the dwell settings that I find are really most important to start with.
I think that's great information on the dwell settings, and I think there's definitely, it's worthwhile from I guess whether it's myself as someone who's supporting eye gaze users, or a clinician, to actually have a play with those dwell settings to experience it themselves as well, because I think that really helps to drive home what those changes do and how we can use them to our advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think we saw a few photos in your presentation around different positioning for our system for different users.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is, what are the limitations for how we can position the camera and our screen for different users in different positions?
Mm-hmm. The most important thing is the person needs to be comfortably positioned to their comfort. So first we position the person, and then we bring the device to them. Some clinics you go into, they position the device first, and then they try and bring the person to the device. That's the wrong order. So if you remember that young boy who was laying on his side, he had spinal muscular atrophy. So these kids, they have to be on one side for an hour, and then they have to be moved to the other side. Or if you have someone in bed who's reclined and they have pillows, if their pillows are sliding and they're falling, it's not going to work. So we get them appropriately and comfortably situated. We bring the screen to be in their natural visual field. So for me right now, I'm sitting upright. The screen needs to be really parallel to my face. If I'm reclined, again, the screen just needs to be parallel to their face, and then you point the camera. That's really the order of operations to make sure that you have a successful experience. If it's too high or too low, you're going to tire them out. So just be aware of where they're naturally staring and put that screen right in their visual field. So as far as limitations, one eye needs to be available for the eye gaze edge. So they can be, and we've had patients positioned this way and on their stomach. Again, you put the screen in front of their visual field and you point the camera at one of their eyes. So there's no real limitations.
And I think touching on that, I think and this goes back to question 5 where we were talking about mounts, is finding a mount that's really flexible for someone, say, at home. For example, we really like a rolling floor mount because it means that we can roll it, reposition it for if they're lying on their side. And then if they move to their favorite comfortable chair, we can then change the positioning of the mount to match that as well. And then because of the modular system, we can look at even having multiple mounting setups for the user if it's within their budget and what they can do at home. We can actually just physically take the system off and move it from mount to mount. So I think, as you showed with yours on your table there, it's just slip it off and move it to the next one, which can be a really good way to, I guess, work around different positions and make sure the user is still comfortable and getting a good use of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I like this question because I think it's very user-centered and focused. What tips and recommendations do you have to help users build their eye gaze skills, and from that get more out of the device as the sort of end result of that sort of training and support?
Mm-hmm. When I go into the home to train someone on an eye gaze device, now over the last year, we've been doing remote trainings because of COVID. I think we're all, in the middle of that here we're starting to open back up, but we realize that there are some limitations, say if we're having a virtual meeting versus hands-on. So finding the primary support staff who will be helping this person set it up every day, teaching them in a way that empowers them and helps them not be so nervous is really important. So finding out who you can teach and then breaking down those skills to be really easy to understand. So that's as far as positioning it correctly, turning it on, and helping the person calibrate. Once the person is calibrated, there's a hierarchy of skills. So I might start off with a simple screen that has just numbers to teach them, like I said, the rhythm of accessing buttons. That's a very basic skill. Then I might put them on a keyboard and have them type hello, right? Or their name. It's a simple skill because they don't have to think. They remember how to type their name. Now, if I were to put them on the web browser, that's an advanced skill. We have some users who, once they get their device, the first thing they want to do is shop on Amazon.com. And I say, okay, I don't want to throw you in the deep end too quickly. Let's practice some basic skills. So I like to say, all right, let's go on these pages, go row by row. It's just like practicing a scale on the piano before you start learning a song. It's the same motoric principles of learning a new instrument or a new sport. You know, your first day at soccer, you're not a star soccer player, football player, right? You have to do your drills, you have to make mistakes. It's the same thing with any motor activity. So pace them to start with simple activities with a lot of support, start fading that support, and then showing them advanced things like, let me show you how to surf a web page, and then let me have you try it. One great thing is on every page, we have a pause key. So when we put them on a new activity, we have them look at pause and look around. They can see not only their eye image, but is it paused or unpaused, to just give them cognitively a little break as they're going into new territory. So really structuring those activities from simple to advanced is important for kind of a successful and empowering experience.
I really love the pause button, and it helped me a lot when I was learning to use the system as well, because I naturally just went straight into web browsing when I should have taken a bit more time to learn it when I first started, and quickly looked at the pause button and had a look around the whole screen. I was like, okay, there's a lot going on here. I need to work out what I've got on my screen, what my options are, and then work out what I want to do and navigate that way. And the pause is really, really helpful for that. And I think it's a really good addition there for us.
I will say too, on our second page of iWorld, we have our training videos. So every iGaze Edge user can go in and watch these short videos. There's about 35 of them. They can watch a video and then practice the skill. Watch the video, practice the skill from beginning skills all the way through advanced. Having the resources too is really important for these people to, learn.
Yeah, and it is just learning a new skill. And I think if we can ignore the technology there for a second and just put it in the context of learning a new skill, we access different resources to learn skills, and having those resources on hand in an accessible way on the tablet makes that a lot easier. But it is just still skill acquisition, and if we frame it around that, I think it demystifies a bit of the technology and some of the magic that's going on there. And it can just be, okay, we've just got to learn this skill. And as we get better, we get more functionality, we get more things that we can do on the system. And that's a natural progression.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've had, I imagine everyone here has had something in their mind that they really built up as, oh, I'm kind of anxious to try this. I think it's going to be really big and hard. And then when you try it, you think, oh, why was I stressing out about that? Not saying that will happen here, but sometimes it does. I've had support staff and caregivers who are so afraid to touch it. Oh, I don't want to break it. And I just say, here, let me pass it to you. Let's get our hands on and just try it. And like you say, demystify, get into it and say like, oh, I can do this. The nice thing is we have great tutorials, a great user manual, and they're your team. I know you'll teach the families and the end users to get over that barrier and get to using it, working with therapists too. That's what we're all about.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing I find really helpful is all of our systems come with a keyboard and a touchpad here, so that wirelessly connects, over Bluetooth to the screen. Is that pulling the keyboard out and then showing that we can still use it as a computer that we're all used to using, and we can also use it as a touch screen. I think that helps to demystify exactly what it is, and that we're still using a computer. So all the computer skills that we have as individuals, whether we're caregiver, a family member, the end user, or a clinician, or anyone else involved in the process, can still understand. Okay, we're still using a computer. We're comfortable with that technology. We've just got an eye tracking camera that allows a different access to it than our traditional inputs of keyboards and touch. Yeah,
that's excellent. I like that. I'm going to steal that. That's so true.
You're more than welcome to.
That is so true.
I think I learned that through working with a lot of schools around implementing digital technologies. But that's another story for another day. James, can I get you to just give us a quick sort of, a couple key points around how the iGaze Edge differs from other trackers on the market, just so that everyone can have a few key ideas that are important to take home around that.
Mm-hmm. So how the iGaze Edge eye trackers, we have the Prime and the Encore eye tracker. How do they differ from what we've seen? Other devices on the market you see as a bar, these are a single lens with a single infrared light. So that's the first difference, is our cameras use one infrared light that shine on the eye or the eyes. So that's the lowest amount of infrared light in the industry. And that's paired with a high accuracy zoom lens to really zoom in on that person's pupil to have a more accurate experience in many cases. So accuracy is king, low fatigue. Two, we have software accommodations for many atypical eye conditions, which we talked about. And then we've paired that, our image processing software is based off of these eye images. So like I told you, the eye image is always put up on top of the screen. And we had a clinician ask, well, why does it just work so well with all these glasses that seem to be a struggle for other eye trackers? And the answer is, and this is really the unique thing, is we have had this eye tracker and collected eye images, tens of thousands of eye images over 3 decades of typical and atypical eyes, and it drives the math that's in this image processing software. So it is just for many people, a superior eye tracking instrument that works for a longer amount of time because it will adapt to their changing eyes over time in a low fatigue model. So I would say those are the biggest takeaway points of what makes this eye tracker different.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think you nailed it there. I think they're really important key differences. I think this last question, and number 10 for us, is, I think we've talked a bit about it and maybe a little bit around it, but I think this comes back to a very client-centered approach to AAC in general, which I would say pretty much every OT, every clinician, every speech and language therapist is looking at a client-centered approach. And I think we just expand that out to the technology and how we go about that. For me, one of the key things that I think is really important for successful implementation, and we talked about it before, is anyone and everyone that is engaging with our user on a regular basis, whether that's the nurse manager at the aged care facility, their daughter, their son, their husband, their wife, anyone who's regularly coming in and spending time with them, if we can get them to buy in and understand how the system works and also train them on the system, then we have this wonderful network of people who are already supporting our user in other ways, able to support them with their communication. And I think that really helps with successful implementation ongoing. And I think we can probably broaden out that cohort of people that are engaging with the user to also the decision makers around funding as well. If they understand what's going on, then they're more likely to approve this sort of technology for a user, but see the real positive and benefits out of this sort of technology.
I agree. I would say too, to all the clinicians, and I know we're getting to the end, if you would like to become a rock star in understanding the principles of eye gaze across all systems, and if you would like to become more of a rock star using the eye gaze edge, reach out to Sam, and we are happy to schedule a more detailed conversation. We can break down some of these critical pieces for clinicians to understand, and I'm happy to help guide a conversation, because I feel like there's so many technologies as speech therapists that we're supposed to know about, and it's so hard to really get the experience that we want to have, so it can be really intimidating. But I would like to offer another session to anyone. So if you're interested, please let the team at the Brainery know, and we can have a follow-up conversation and delve into some specific and get you more well-versed and more confident in eye gaze AAC.
That sounds wonderful. And I think what we'll do is we'll pull together all the comments, questions that we may have through the YouTube stream, and also anything that we haven't had time to address from the original registration link where people put in questions and topics. We'll pull out a few more, I guess, specific and complex questions that we can then address with you, James. I think that would be of great value to everyone.
Wonderful.
So I think we're at the end of our webinar today. So I want to say a massive thank you to you, James. Thanks for joining the stream, and I know that it's after hours for you in the US. So a big thank you for taking the time out to join us. We really appreciate your insights and your expertise, and I'm sure I speak for everyone on the stream when I say that, and everyone in the office as well really appreciates your help and support.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Good luck. Look forward to hearing from you.
And just before I switch off the stream, any questions, any ideas, anything you want to share with us, our contact details are up there, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. And James, we'll look forward to hosting you again, and hopefully we won't have any technical issues the second time. But thanks again for everyone's patience around that, and have a wonderful evening, James, and look forward to speaking with you shortly.
Take care, everyone. Be well.
Recording stopped.